On the morning of May 2nd, 1945, Berlin was no longer a capital in any meaningful sense. It was a battlefield of shattered streets, burning buildings, and underground rooms filled with the remnants of a regime that had promised its people a 1,000-year empire. For days, Soviet forces had been fighting their way towards the center of the city. The Red Army was closing around the Reich Chancellery, the symbolic heart of Hitler's government. Beneath that ruined complex lay the bunker system where Adolf Hitler had spent the final weeks of his life. But there is an important problem with the story often told today about a mysterious Room 86. There is no reliable historical evidence for a famous bunker chamber officially known as Room 86, in which the Red Army discovered a secret treasure, laboratory, archive, or other extraordinary object. Contemporary documentation and post-war investigations identify the Führerbunker and Führerbunker by their functions and locations, not by a historically established Room 86. The bunker itself consisted of a complex arrangement of rooms, corridors, and technical spaces beneath the Reich Chancellery. That distinction matters, because what the Soviet soldiers actually found there was extraordinary enough without inventing a secret room. By the beginning of May, the Reich Chancellery grounds had become almost unrecognizable. The monumental architecture Albert Speer had designed as a demonstration of Nazi power had been battered by Allied bombing and the final Soviet assault. Underground, however, parts of the bunker remained remarkably intact. The Führerbunker had been constructed deeper beneath the Reich Chancellery as Germany's military fortunes deteriorated. Its reinforced concrete roof was approximately 3 meters thick, while the complex lay several meters below ground. It was connected to the older Führerbunker and had exits leading towards the Chancellery Gardens. Inside those corridors, the last days of the Third Reich had unfolded in extraordinary claustrophobia. Hitler had issued orders from underground while Soviet artillery shook the city above him. Eva Braun was there. Joseph Goebbels and his family were there. Military officers, secretaries, guards, and servants moved through the narrow rooms as Berlin collapsed around them. On April 29th, Hitler married Eva Braun. The following day, with Soviet troops fighting ever closer to the Chancellery, Hitler and Braun died by suicide. Their deaths did not immediately end the story of the bunker. The bodies were carried outside through the emergency exit into the garden above. There, members of Hitler's entourage attempted to burn the corpses, following Hitler's instructions. The remains were later recovered by Soviet personnel and became the center of one of the most intensely guarded investigations of the post-war period. When Soviet forces finally secured the Reich Chancellery complex, they were not entering an untouched time capsule. They encountered destruction. Rooms had been abandoned in haste. Equipment remained scattered through the underground complex. Documents, personal possessions, and military material lay among the debris. The surviving rooms offered something more valuable than a mythical treasure, physical evidence of the final days of the Nazi leadership. The Soviet investigation was particularly interested in one question. Where was Hitler? The discovery of his remains became a matter of enormous political and intelligence significance. Soviet investigators questioned survivors, searched the grounds, and examined the remains recovered from the garden. Dental evidence eventually played a crucial role in identifying Hitler's body. The Soviet authorities, however, maintained secrecy around the evidence for years, helping to create the extraordinary rumors that later surrounded Hitler's fate. And this is where the real story becomes more fascinating than the legend of Room 86. The bunker was not simply a hiding place. It was the physical endpoint of the Nazi state. The rooms had once been designed to protect Hitler from the consequences of the war he had unleashed. By April 1945, they had become a prison from which there was almost no escape. Above ground, the Red Army was dismantling the final perimeter of the German capital. Below ground, the regime had already collapsed psychologically. Hitler's political testament attempted to explain the disaster as betrayal. He blamed others. He appointed successors. He continued to speak in the language of ideological struggle, even as Soviet troops occupied the city around him. The physical evidence told a different story. There was no miraculous final weapon, no hidden command center capable of reversing the war, no secret chamber containing the means to resurrect the Third Reich. Instead, Soviet soldiers encountered the remains of a government that had continued issuing orders after its ability to control events had disappeared. The contrast was extraordinary. The Nazi state had spent years constructing monumental buildings, underground bunkers, military headquarters, and elaborate systems of security. Yet none of those structures could protect it from the consequences of its own strategic decisions. The deeper the Red Army advanced, the smaller Hitler's world became. First, Germany had controlled much of Europe. Then it controlled only Germany. Then Berlin. Then the Reich Chancellery. And finally, a handful of concrete rooms beneath the ruins. The Führerbunker, therefore, became something very different from what its architects had intended. It was supposed to preserve the leadership of the Third Reich during air raids. Instead, it became the final stage of that leadership. The Soviet soldiers who entered the complex did not discover a hidden Nazi future. They discovered its ending. And that is why the claim about Room 86 should be treated carefully. The historical record does not support presenting such a room as a documented secret chamber of the Führerbunker. What can be established is considerably more powerful. In the final days of April and early May 1945, Soviet forces entered the underground headquarters beneath the Reich Chancellery, examined the remnants of Hitler's final headquarters, searched for evidence of his death, and ultimately uncovered the physical remains of a dictatorship that had consumed much of Europe. The mystery was never really what was inside one numbered room. The mystery was how a regime that had once appeared almost unstoppable had ended in a handful of concrete chambers beneath a ruined city. And when the Red Army finally reached the center of that world, there was nothing left to conquer. Only evidence, only ruins, and the unmistakable remains of an empire that had destroyed itself.